As we think about the concept of the self, a very important component comes to mind for many of us, and that's the concept of self-esteem. So in this section, you're going to be learning about the implications of self-concept confusion and self-esteem instability. You're also going to be learning about how high and low self-esteem are related to adjustment. You're also going to be learning about the difference between high self-esteem and narcissism. And you're going to be learning about the relationship between narcissism and aggression. And then finally, you're also going to be learning about some of the key forces that affect the development of our self-esteem.
Self-esteem can be described as a self-judgment, our overall assessment of our own worth as a person. Early research has highlighted the differences between trait self-esteem, which is an individual's inherent level of self-esteem, and state self-esteem, which is dependent on the level of success or failure in a relevant and personal goal. Having a high self-esteem is considered to be one of the most important factors in our mental health. And of course, there is a very distinct difference between having a high self-esteem and being narcissistic, which we'll be exploring. But also remember, you learned about that concept in Chapter 1. So this concept of self-esteem, having a high self-esteem, is a significant driver of behavior across a broad spectrum of behaviors that we each engage in. It relates to how we emotionally experience life events. So for example, it can increase or decrease our positive emotions when we're experiencing success, or influence our negative emotions when we have a perceived failure. If you take a look at your textbook at Figure 6.6, you'll see here how the authors have illustrated this concept of self-esteem, that it's a global evaluation combining assessments of many aspects of our self-concept. And these are each built up from many specific behaviors and experiences. So how are self-esteem and adjustment related? They're related in many ways. One way, for example, is that self-esteem, high self-esteem, is strongly and consistently connected to happiness. It's also connected to feeling more likable and attractive, having better relationships, and making better impressions on others. These are just a few things that high self-esteem is connected to. So there's a measurement that is used to measure self-esteem. It's called the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale. If you're interested in this, you could do a Google search for it. And it has items like, on the whole, I am very satisfied with myself, or I feel that I have a high number, or I feel that I have a number of good qualities, and I'm able to do things as well as most other people. These are not items that are about being superior to other people, but they're about having a healthy level of self-worth and self-competence. So when we're dealing with self-esteem, we're really thinking about whether the individual considers themselves to be adequate, a person of worth, not whether they consider themselves to be superior to other people. If you look at Figure 6.9 in your textbook, you'll see more, you'll gain more insight into this concept of narcissism. So you can see here how narcissists are much more inclined to use aggression when they feel that their perception of themselves is being threatened. There are many factors that contribute to the development of a high self-esteem. Of particular importance are our experiences in early childhood, and more specifically, our experiences in terms of how our parents parent us. Two important dimensions of parenting are parental acceptance and parental control. Together, these dimensions yield 4 parenting styles. So let's take a look at Figure 6.11. Let's take a look at each of these parenting styles, and as we do, I want you to think about why each of these parenting styles may be associated with different self-esteem outcomes, and more specifically, why authoritative parenting would be most connected to a high self-esteem. Let's start with authoritarian parenting. Authoritarian parents tend to have a belief that kids should be seen and not heard. When it comes to rules, they believe it's their way or the highway, and they're not likely to take the child's feelings into consideration. Authoritarian parents may be famous for saying things like, "because I said so," when a child questions the reasons behind a rule. They're not that interested in negotiating, and their focus tends to be on obedience. They also don't allow kids to get involved in the problem-solving challenges or obstacles. Instead, what they're doing is making rules and enforcing the consequences with very little regard for the child's opinion. Authoritarian parents may use punishments instead of discipline. So rather than teach a child how to make better choices, they're invested in, really focusing on the negative outcomes and making the child feel bad for whatever behavior it was that they engaged in. So children who grow up with strict authoritarian parents, they are more inclined to follow rules much of the time, but their obedience can come at a price. So this price is that these children tend to rank lower in happiness, lower in social competence, and lower in self-esteem. Let's take a look at authoritative parenting. Authoritative parents put a lot of effort into creating and maintaining a positive relationship with their child. They explain the reasons behind the rules. They enforce rules and give consequences, but they take their child's feelings into consideration. What they're doing is they're validating their child's feelings while also making it clear that adults are ultimately in charge. They also will invest the time and energy into preventing problem behaviors before they start. They're more inclined to use positive discipline strategies to reinforce good behavior like praise and reward systems. So there's not a significant emphasis on punishment. That does not mean that there is no punishment, but there is a much more significant emphasis on positive outcomes for what is desired. And that's what the research supports. If we want to see behaviors that are desired, we have to focus on reinforcement. Reinforcement tells children what they ought to be doing, whereas punishment tells children what not to do. The problem is if we're using too much punishment, we're only telling children what not to do. I liken it to an IKEA furniture manual. I don't know if any of you have ever seen IKEA furniture manuals, but they can be a little bit difficult to follow. And what they're doing in these manuals is they're telling you how to assemble furniture. Well, let's imagine that the manual doesn't tell you how to assemble furniture, but it tells you how not to assemble it. If that's what they're describing, you're going to be completely lost. For children, they need direction. They need to know what it is that is desired, not only what it is that is not desired. Children who are raised with authoritative parenting, they're more inclined to be happy and successful. And again, they do tend to have a high self-esteem. They're more likely to be good at making decisions, and they tend to be good at evaluating the risks of potentially dangerous behaviors on their own, which is what parents want, because parents will not always be present. They want their kids to be good at making decisions and to believe in their ability to make decisions. If parents are involving their children in the discussion about why they can or cannot do, why the child can or cannot do things, you can imagine how this can contribute then to helping the child to develop a good ability to make decisions when the parent is not present. Let's take a look at permissive parents. Some of you, when you were kids, you might have felt like you had too many rules in your house, and you may have known a friend who didn't seem to have many rules, and that they could pretty much do what they wanted. And that might have on the outside looked like a more desirable situation, but actually a parenting experience like this does not lead to high self-esteem like authoritative parenting does. So parents who are permissive, they do set rules, but they're rarely enforcing them. They don't give out consequences very often, and they think that their child will learn best, oftentimes with little interference from the parent. So they will often only step in when there's a serious problem. They might follow this attitude of kids will be kids, and when they do use consequences, they may not make those consequences stick. So for example, they might give privileges back if a child begs, or they may allow a child to get out of timeout early if he promises to be good. Now, some of you, as you're thinking about these parenting styles, you may notice that there's the possibility for some overlap. If you're trying to figure out where your early experiences fell, think about what was most typical, what was most common. Let's take a look at this last type of parenting, which is neglectful parenting. Neglectful parents don't tend to be very interested in what their children are doing in their lives, so they aren't inclined to ask their child about school or schoolwork. They rarely know where their child is or who they're with. They don't spend much time with their child. Children might not receive much guidance or nurturing or parental attention. So uninvolved parents expect children to raise themselves. They don't devote much time or energy into meeting the child's basic needs. They tend to be neglectful um, in this way, but it's not always intentional. Sometimes it can be that a parent has mental health issues or substance abuse problems, and they may not be able to take care of the child's physical or emotional needs on a consistent basis. Sometimes uninvolved parents might not have the knowledge that they need about child development, and sometimes they're overwhelmed with other problems like work, paying bills, or managing a household. Children who are raised in environments where they experienced parents who are, permissive or uninvolved. Are neglectful or uninvolved. They are more likely to struggle with self-esteem issues. They also tend to not do as well in school and might exhibit some behavior problems or rank low in happiness. So overall, we can see here the benefits of having a parenting experience where there is authoritative parenting. So when you think about yourselves, for those of you who do become parents, authoritative parenting is the most desirable. And I would encourage you to read more about this. I would also encourage you to think about your own experiences and how they have shaped how you see yourself. Please remember too that self-esteem is not something that is fixed. It's not something that we are, where we're stuck with a certain level of self-esteem or way of seeing ourselves. We can improve our self-esteem. There are many ways to do this that are described in your textbook. And then, of course, going through therapy can be very beneficial. Having healthy relationships with other family members and friends can also be very helpful.
So what have you learned? You've learned about the implications of self-concept confusion and self-esteem instability. You've also learned about the relationship between high and low self-esteem and adjustment. And you've learned about the difference between high self-esteem and narcissism and the relationship between narcissism and aggression. And then you also learned about some of the key influences in the development of self-esteem. What will you learn about next? You'll learn about the basic concepts related to self-perception. And you'll learn about the differences between controlled and automatic processing. You'll learn too about self-attributions and the different dimensions of attributions. You'll also learn about how optimistic and pessimistic explanatory styles are related to adjustment and the methods that we use for self-enhancement. I look forward to seeing each of you online.